The marketplace was loud, full of voices, full of noise, full of cruel laughter. It was not the laughter of joy, but of mockery. A cage stood at the center of the trading ground, iron bars rusted, and inside the cage stood a tiny alien girl. She was smaller than the others around her, thinner, weaker, like a child even though she was older. Her skin looked pale under the harsh suns, her arms barely covering her body as the crowd threw words sharper than stones. "Look at her! She is smaller than a tool rat," one trader shouted, and others burst into laughter. "She's useless! Can't fight, can't cook, can't work. Why waste space?" Another cried. The girl lowered her head, her long hair falling across her face. She pressed herself against the bars as if she wanted to disappear into the metal. Shame burned inside her, but she did not speak. She knew that if she spoke, they would laugh louder. The auctioneer lifted his voice, calling for bids. "This one? A miniature alien female. Rare? Maybe. Valuable? You decide. Starting price, half the usual." Half the usual. The words carried weight. The crowd laughed louder, the sound rolling like thunder. The girl's stomach twisted. Even her price was not real. She was worth less than broken tools and cracked pots. "Half the usual?" someone shouted. "She should be free. Just take her away." Another voice said, "Better yet, throw her to the dogs. At least they will find some use for her." The girl trembled. Her hands clutched her thin dress, her eyes filling with tears she did not want to show. In her heart, she wished the ground would open and swallow her whole. The auctioneer tried to calm the noise, but even he smirked. He knocked the side of the cage with a stick. "Quiet, quiet. The price is set. Who will take this one? Who will own her?" The silence after his words was worse than the laughter. No one raised a hand. No one stepped forward. The crowd shifted, muttering, mocking, pointing. Some looked bored, already turning to the next cages where stronger slaves were chained. The girl's heart sank. Even here, even as property, no one wanted her. She had expected pain, hunger, cruelty. She had not expected to be nothing at all. The auctioneer's voice grew impatient. "Does no one want her? She eats little, takes little space. Maybe some entertainment for children. Come now, at this price she is practically free." Still, no one moved. The air was heavy with rejection. And then a voice spoke, calm, low, cutting through the noise. "I will take her." The words were simple, but they froze the crowd. Heads turned sharply. There, at the edge of the market, stood a human. He was taller than most, his frame broad, his clothes dusty from travel. His hand was raised high, steady, not trembling. For a moment, silence ruled the market. Then laughter exploded again, even louder than before. "A human! Of course it's him!" "They are foolish, always taking strays. He wastes his money. He wants this tiny broken thing? Let him have her. He must be desperate." The auctioneer looked at the man with narrowed eyes. "Human, you understand what you're doing? This one is weak, useless, worthless. She will bring you nothing but shame." The man's hand stayed in the air. His face did not change. His eyes did not shift. The girl inside the cage looked up slowly. Her vision blurred from tears. But through them she saw his hand, his steady arm, his calm face. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't mocking. He wasn't turning away. The auctioneer tried again. "Do you still want her? The crowd laughs at you. She has no strength, no beauty, no skills. Why not wait for the next one? A real worker, a real prize." The human's voice was flat but firm. "I said, I will take her." His hand never moved down. The girl's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to believe this was real, but her heart screamed it must be a trick. Perhaps he would raise his hand only to drop it, to mock her like the others. Perhaps he was playing a cruel joke. Yet he stood unmoving, his shadow stretching toward the cage, covering her like a shield. The auctioneer shrugged, annoyed. "Fine. She is yours." He hit the cage with his stick again, and the lock was undone. The iron door creaked open, and a shove sent the girl stumbling out onto the dirt ground. The crowd cheered, clapping mockingly. "Look at the human! Buying garbage!" She fell to her knees in the dust, her legs too weak to hold her. She waited for him to laugh, to humiliate her, but instead he walked forward. Slowly, he removed his coat and placed it around her shoulders. The cloth was rough, but it was warm, and it covered her naked shame. The crowd's laughter softened into mutters. Some sneered, some spat, but none could ignore the sight. The human bent down, his voice quiet enough for only her to hear. "You are coming with me." Her eyes widened. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She wanted to ask why, wanted to ask how, but all she could do was clutch the coat tighter around her trembling body. The human helped her stand. His hand was firm, steady, like the one that had never lowered. As he guided her out of the market, the crowd's voices faded behind them. She looked up at him one last time, the sun burning above, the dust rising around their steps. For the first time in her life, someone had chosen her. For the first time, she felt like maybe she was not a mistake. And in her heart, one thought kept repeating. His hand had gone up, and he had never put it down. The dust from the marketplace still clung to the girl's skin as she stood trembling beside the human. The crowd had begun to scatter, but their words followed like stones thrown at her back. He wasted his money, one voice muttered. She won't last a week, another laughed. Yet the man who had lifted his hand did not flinch. His steps were steady, his face calm, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder as though guiding her away from the shame she had always known. The trader who had sold her spat on the ground, shaking his head. You will regret this, human. She is nothing but dead weight. His voice carried sharpness, almost anger, but the human did not answer. He kept walking, his silence louder than any argument. The girl dared to glance up at him, expecting him to change his mind, to hand her back like unwanted cargo. But his hand remained firm on her shoulder, steady as a wall. When they reached the edge of the market, she felt the eyes of strangers still burning into her back. The laughter did not stop. It rolled over her like thunder. Her cheeks burned. She wanted to sink into the ground, to vanish, to free him of the shame she thought she brought. She whispered in a broken voice, "You don't have to keep me. Let me go." Her words were almost lost under the noise of the market. The human stopped walking. Slowly, he turned his head and looked down at her. His eyes were sharp, serious, but not cruel. He didn't speak right away, but his silence made her chest tighten. Finally, he said in a low, steady tone, "I do not let go of what I choose." Then he began walking again, leaving no room for argument. The girl stumbled after him, her thin legs struggling to keep up. Every step made her body ache, her stomach groan from hunger. She had expected that he would laugh at her weakness, push her aside when she slowed. Instead, he turned once, saw her falling behind, heard that, and without a word, bent down and lifted her into his arms. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. No one had carried her before. No one had even touched her without cruelty. His arms were strong, steady, not shaking, not careless. She clung to his coat that still hung around her shoulders, feeling its warmth press deeper. The market disappeared behind them, the voices fading, though the memory of the laughter still echoed in her ears. As he carried her down the road, she dared to ask, her voice barely more than a whisper, "Why me?" She expected no answer, but his voice came, calm as ever. Because no one else did. Her eyes filled with tears, but she quickly pressed her face against his chest, hiding them. She didn't want him to see her cry, not after he had shown such strange, unexpected kindness. When they reached his shelter, a small stone house at the edge of the colony, the air grew quiet. There were no mocking voices here, no sneering faces, only the sound of the wind brushing against the walls. He set her down gently on her feet, and for a moment she wobbled, unsteady like a newborn creature. He opened the wooden door and motioned her inside. The room was simple. One table, one chair, a bed pushed against the wall, and shelves with tools neatly placed. To her, it felt like a palace. She had never seen a place so clean, so orderly, so safe. She stood in the doorway, clutching the coat tightly around her, afraid to step further, as if she did not belong. The human noticed her hesitation. Without saying anything, he walked to the table, filled a bowl with water, and handed it to her. "Drink." His voice was firm but not harsh. She took it with shaking hands, raising it to her lips. The cool water touched her tongue, and her body shivered. She drank greedily, drops spilling down her chin until the bowl was empty. He watched silently, then placed a plate of bread and dried meat in front of her. She stared at it, unable to believe it was for her. For a moment, fear touched her heart. Was this a trick? Would he take it away if she reached for it? But when she looked up, his expression was steady, unreadable, waiting. Slowly, she reached out, tore a piece of bread, and put it in her mouth. The taste was rough but filling, and tears welled again as she chewed. She ate until her stomach ached from the sudden fullness, then lowered the plate with trembling hands. She whispered, "Why are you doing this?" Her voice cracked. full of disbelief. He sat across from her, his arms resting on the table. His eyes never left hers, though he said nothing at first. The silence stretched, heavy, yet not cruel. Finally he spoke, his voice quiet, almost like a vow. Because no one else will. The words struck her harder than the laughter ever had. She looked at him, trying to see if there was any trick in his eyes, but there was none. He did not laugh. He did not mock. He did not turn away. Night began to fall, and the shadows grew long in the small house. The human stood, lit a small lamp, and placed it near her. Then, without a word, he laid a blanket on the floor beside the fire and motioned for her to rest. She hesitated, looking at him, unsure. He turned away, giving her space, his silence protecting her more than any wall could. Lying down on the blanket, she pulled the coat tighter around her. For the first time, she felt warmth that was not from the sun, safety that was not from walls, but from a choice someone had made. She closed her eyes, but her heart beat fast, restless, unable to believe it was real. As sleep slowly pulled her in, she kept replaying the moment in the market when his hand had gone up and never fallen. She realized then that his silence was not emptiness. It was strength. It was promise. And though fear still lived in her heart, another feeling began to grow, something she had never felt before: hope. The morning light slipped into the small stone house, touching the walls with a soft glow. The alien girl opened her eyes slowly, her body stiff from sleep on the blanket by the fire. For a moment, she forgot where she was, and fear rushed through her. But then she saw the human sitting at the table, quietly fixing a broken tool with calm hands. The coat he had given her still rested on her shoulders. The memory of yesterday returned, and her chest tightened. She wasn't in the cage anymore. She wasn't surrounded by mocking voices. She was here. Her stomach growled, loud enough for him to notice. Without a word, he set down the tool and walked to the shelf. He placed a bowl of porridge in front of her, steam rising into the air. She blinked at it, surprised. No one had ever cared about her hunger before. She picked up the spoon with trembling fingers and began to eat. Each bite warmed her, filling the empty space inside her chest that had lived there for years. The human sat back down, returning to his work. He didn't stare, didn't rush her, didn't mock her greedy eating. He simply allowed her to eat in peace. When she finally finished, her hands shook, not from hunger anymore, but from something else, something she didn't know how to name. She whispered, almost to herself, "Thank you." Her words hung in the air, thin and fragile. She expected him to ignore them, but his eyes lifted for a brief moment. He gave a single nod before returning to his work. That small gesture felt heavier to her than any speech. Later, when she tried to stand, her legs gave out beneath her. She gasped, embarrassed, clutching the coat tighter. She thought he would be angry, maybe scold her for being weak. But instead, he rose and lifted her again, as he had done in the market. His arms were steady, his grip secure, as though her weight meant nothing. He carried her outside, where the sun warmed the earth. The road stretched long before them, leading to the well at the edge of the colony. She understood what he wanted, to fetch water. Shame filled her, because she could not even walk that far. Still, she whispered, "I can try." Her voice shook, but she wanted to prove herself. He looked down at her, studying her pale face, then set her gently on her feet. Her legs trembled like thin sticks in the wind. She forced herself forward, 1 step, 2 steps, each one heavy like lifting stones. She stumbled, but caught herself. Sweat formed on her brow, and her breath came short. After a dozen more steps, her knees buckled, and she fell to the ground. Her face burned with shame. She wanted to cry, but swallowed it down, whispering, "I'm useless." The human crouched beside her. His hand reached out, but instead of lifting her immediately, he steadied her arm. "Again," he said softly. "Just 1 word. No anger. No mockery. Only command, but gentle." She pushed herself up, legs shaking, and tried again. Step after step, her body screamed, but his calm presence beside her gave her courage. He walked slowly, never rushing, never leaving her behind. When she fell again, he lifted her without hesitation and carried her the rest of the way to the well. At the water's edge, he set her down on the stone ledge. She watched him draw water with strong arms, the bucket heavy but moving easily in his hands. He poured some into a smaller jar and handed it to her. She gripped it tightly, determined not to drop it. For the first time, she carried something back with him, even if it was only a fraction of the load. That evening, Back inside the house, she tried again to help. She swept the floor, though she was clumsy and slow. She tried to clean the tools, but her weak hands fumbled, dropping one to the ground with a loud clang. She froze, expecting anger, maybe punishment. But the human only glanced up, his face unreadable, then quietly picked up the tool and placed it back on the table. He guided her hands once, showing her how to grip it properly, then let her try again. She wasn't good, not yet, but he did not take the task away. He let her fail, let her try, let her learn. That night, lying under the coat by the fire, she stared at the ceiling. No one had ever been patient with her before. No one had given her time to learn. Her heart felt strange, beating faster than usual, not with fear, but with something softer. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, her body grew stronger. Her cheeks filled, her eyes shone brighter. The girl who had once been nothing but skin and bone began to move with more life. She still stumbled often, still dropped things, but each mistake was met with his calm silence, never cruelty. One day, when the human returned from hunting, he found her sitting at the table with a pot of soup she had managed to make. The taste was uneven, the broth too thin, but when he ate it, he said nothing against it. He finished the bowl without complaint. She stared at him, waiting for him to speak, and finally asked, "Is it bad?" He looked at her, his eyes steady. "It is food," he said simply. She laughed softly, the sound strange on her own lips. For the first time, she felt proud of something she had done. But deep in her chest, fear still lived. Every kindness made her heart ache more because she worried it would all vanish. Maybe one day he would realize she was not worth the effort. Maybe he would grow tired and push her away. That fear followed her into sleep, whispering in the dark. Still, each morning when she opened her eyes, he was there. Each day, he gave her food. Each evening, he allowed her to try again. She began to see that his silence was not emptiness, it was strength. And though she did not say it aloud, she began to believe something dangerous, something powerful. Maybe she was not worthless after all. Maybe she was more than the broken creature the market had mocked. Maybe she had a place, not because she was useful, but because he had chosen to keep his hand raised and never let it fall. The colony was never silent. News spread like fire, quick and merciless, and soon everyone knew what had happened in the market. The human had bought the smallest, weakest alien girl. People laughed in the streets, mocking him whenever he passed. He wasted his coins, they said. He feeds a mouth that will never work. Their whispers followed him everywhere, and though some spoke softly, others made sure he could hear. Children pointed at the girl when she walked beside him, their parents sneering as if her very presence was a joke. The girl felt the weight of every stare. She kept her head down, her thin frame hidden inside the coat he had given her. Each time she heard their laughter, her chest tightened, and she wanted to run. She wanted to free him from the shame she thought she brought. But the human never reacted. His step stayed steady. His eyes never turned toward the mocking voices. He carried his tools, fetched his water, hunted his food, and lived his life as though their words were nothing more than wind. One evening, a group of men stopped him outside his house. They smirked, their eyes sharp with cruelty. "Why keep her?" one asked. "She's nothing but a drain on you. Give her to us, and we'll rid you of the burden." The girl's heart froze. Her hands clutched the edge of the coat. She waited for him to push her forward, to give her away and be free of the laughter. But the human's face hardened, his voice cold. "She stays." The words were simple, but his tone cut through the air like a blade. The men stared at him, then spat on the ground before leaving. Their insults echoed, but he did not move until they were gone. Then he opened his door and guided her inside without another word. That night, the girl sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Her hands trembled as she hugged her knees close. She had been unwanted for as long as she could remember. She had been laughed at, beaten down, left to rot in a cage. And now this man stood against everyone. For her. She did not understand why. She could not hold the weight of it in her heart. She turned her head slowly, watching him as he repaired a hunting knife, his movements calm and focused. The silence stretched, heavy with her unspoken questions. At last, she whispered, "Why me?" Her voice cracked. She had asked before, but this time it was different. This time she needed to know. The human paused, his hand resting on the blade. For a moment, the only sound was the crackle of fire. He lifted his eyes, and though his face was still, his gaze was firm. Because no one else did. Her breath caught. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart race. No one else did. Those words rolled through her, heavy and soft at the same time. He had not chosen her because she was strong, or skilled, or beautiful. He had chosen her because no one else would. The firelight flickered across his face, and she realized his silence had never been emptiness. It was a shield. She lay down that night, her back to the fire, unable to sleep. The words circled in her mind, filling the spaces where shame had lived for so long. Outside, the wind carried whispers of the colony's gossip. Inside, the human's steady breathing filled the room. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his presence ease the sting of the laughter outside. The days that followed were no easier. Neighbors came with sneers, asking questions. What does she do for you? When will you get rid of her? Some even offered trade, tools, food, even animals, in exchange for the girl. But each time, the human's answer was the same. She stays. His voice never rose, never faltered. It was the same calm certainty as when he had raised his hand in the market. The girl began to notice how different he was from everyone else. While others laughed and jeered, he worked. While others gossiped, he built. He moved through the world like a rock in the river, unshaken, unbroken, no matter how hard the water struck. She watched him closely, trying to understand the strength that lived in his silence. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she whispered again, "They laugh at you because of me." Her voice trembled, heavy with guilt. He looked at her then, his eyes steady. "Let them laugh." Her throat tightened. "But it hurts you." He shook his head, his expression calm, almost unreadable. "It only hurts if I care what they think. I don't." The simplicity of his words stunned her. She had lived her whole life trapped by others' voices, crushed by their laughter, shaped by their scorn. But here was someone who stood tall in the face of it, unaffected. She wanted to believe she could be like that too, but fear held her back. That night, lying under the coat, she whispered to herself, "Because no one else did." She repeated his words over and over, as if they could protect her from the weight of her past. Slowly, for the first time in her life, she felt a spark of safety, a spark of worth. The world outside still laughed, still pointed, still mocked, but inside the small stone house, something had changed. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was filled with meaning. Each quiet glance, each unspoken word, carried weight. She realized then that his raised hand in the market had not only freed her from the cage, it had broken the chains inside her heart. And though fear still whispered in the corners of her mind, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was not nothing. Maybe, to him, she was already something. The sky was red with the glow of fire when the raiders came. They swept through the outer farms of the colony like wolves, breaking doors, stealing food, and dragging people out of their homes. Screams filled the air, the sound of metal against wood, the heavy thud of boots. The girl hid behind the doorway of the human's house, clutching the coat he had given her tightly around her shoulders. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like it would break through her chest. The human stepped outside with nothing but a hunting spear in his hands. His face was calm, his eyes sharp as he scanned the chaos. He moved with quiet confidence, not like the others who ran in fear. He motioned for her to stay hidden, but she could not take her eyes off him. She wanted to call him back, to beg him not to go, but the words stuck in her throat. When he returned hours later, the smell of smoke clung to him. His clothes were torn, his hands stained with ash and dirt. Behind him came voices, crying, desperate. The girl peeked out from the doorway and saw them. Children, covered in dust and blood, stumbling after him. They had been trapped in the ruins of a burned barn. No adult had been able to reach them, but the human had crawled through the smoke and rubble to pull them out one by one. The people who once mocked him stood in stunned silence as the children clung to him, their tiny arms wrapping around his waist. They looked at the alien girl too, their eyes wide, remembering how they had laughed at her weakness. And yet, it was her size that had made the rescue possible. The human had called her over, his voice steady, telling her to help. At first, her hands trembled so badly she thought she would fail. But when he placed one of the smallest children in her arms, something inside her shifted. She was no longer the creature from the cage. She was someone holding life, someone trusted with something precious. She carried the child carefully to safety, her legs shaking, but she did not fall. As the night stretched on, she crawled through gaps too narrow for the human, slipping into broken walls, pulling at fallen beams with weak hands that somehow found strength. Each time she dragged a child out, she met his eyes, and in them she saw silent pride. Not words, not praise, but trust. When the last child was free, she collapsed on the dirt, her body aching, her lungs burning from the smoke. Around her, the crowd murmured, whispering about what they had seen. No one laughed now, no one mocked. They only watched in silence as the human lifted her into his arms and carried her back home. Inside, he laid her gently on the blanket by the fire, placing water by her side. She drank slowly, her throat raw. Her eyes were heavy, but her heart was alive in a way it had never been before. For the first time, she had done something that mattered, not just to him, but to others. The next morning, the whispers in the colony had changed. People spoke of the human's bravery, but also of the girl. They said she had saved children with her small frame, slipping where no one else could. The same mouths that had once laughed at her weakness now fell quiet when she walked by. She still felt their stares, but they were different, less cruel, more uncertain. She did not know what to do with this new attention. She wanted to hide, but when she looked at the human, she saw no change in him. He worked as before, carried his tools, sharpened his blade, fetched the water. It was as if the world's opinion meant nothing. And slowly, she began to feel the same. One evening, as she tried to sweep the floor with clumsy movements, she whispered, "They saw me. They saw me help." She expected him to ignore her, but he looked up from his work. His eyes met hers, steady as always. "I saw you first," he said. Her throat tightened, and she dropped the broom, tears stinging her eyes. Those words weighed heavier than any praise she had heard in the colony. He had seen her worth before anyone else had, before she had even seen it herself. The days after the raid were not easy. More attacks were rumored, and fear hung in the air. People still doubted her, still muttered that she was weak, that she would fail when it mattered most. But she remembered the fire, the children's hands clutching hers, the human's steady gaze, and each time she stumbled or dropped a tool, she no longer whispered useless to herself. Instead, she whispered, "I can try again." The human never spoke long, never wasted words, but his actions were enough. When she carried water, he walked beside her. When she tried to cook, he tasted the food without complaint. When she struggled with tools, he guided her hands until she could manage. Each small step built something inside her, something she had never known she could carry: pride. The colony's laughter had not disappeared, but it no longer crushed her. Their voices were fading behind the louder truth of her own heart. She had helped save lives. She had been more than nothing. And though she still feared the next raid, the next trial, she knew she was no longer the same fragile creature from the cage. She was changing slowly, painfully, but truly. And the reason was simple. When the world had laughed at her, one hand had risen in defiance, and it had never gone down. The night sky was heavy with clouds when the raiders returned. This time they came not just for food or tools, but for blood. The colony gates shook under their force, and the cries of fear spread through the narrow streets. People rushed to hide, locking doors, blowing out lamps, trying to vanish into the dark. The alien girl sat by the fire in the human's house, her hands clutching the coat around her chest. Her heart hammered as the sounds of breaking wood and shouts filled the air. She knew they would come for her. They always came for the weakest. Outside, neighbors gathered in panic. Some banged on the human's door, their voices sharp with fear. "Give her to them," one man shouted. "They want the weak ones. If you hand her over, they'll leave us alone." Another woman's voice rose, trembling with anger. "She's not worth the danger. Do you want us all to die because of her?" The girl froze, her body shaking. Their words cut deeper than knives. She turned her wide, frightened eyes toward the human. She expected him to falter, to give her away, to save himself. That was what anyone else would have done. Her lips parted, ready to beg him not to fight for her, ready to whisper that she wasn't worth it. But before she could speak, he stepped forward. The human opened the door and faced the angry neighbors. His shadow stretched long in the torchlight, his figure strong and unmoving. He held nothing but an iron bar in his hand, gripped tightly as though it were a sword. His voice was low, calm, but full of steel. "She stays!" The words struck the air like thunder. The neighbors stared at him in disbelief. One of them shouted again, "You'll get us all killed!" But the human did not move. His eyes, sharp as stone, burned with a promise that silenced their protests. He closed the door in their faces, locking it against both enemies and supposed allies. Inside, the girl pressed her back to the wall, her breath shallow. She whispered, "Why? They're right. I'll only bring you trouble." The human looked at her for a long time, his silence louder than any answer. Then he said simply, "Because you are mine to protect." Her throat tightened. No one had ever claimed her like that. Not as a burden, not as a joke, but as something worth defending. Tears filled her eyes, hot and heavy, spilling down her cheeks. She covered her mouth with her hands, afraid her sobs would give them away to the raiders outside. The night grew darker. The raiders broke through the colony gates, storming in with wild cries. The human positioned himself by the door, iron bar ready. His face was calm, but the tension in his shoulders showed he was prepared to fight until the last breath. The girl crawled closer, clutching his coat as if its fabric could shield her from death. Her body shook, but deep inside, something fierce began to rise. When the first raider slammed against the door, the wood shuddered. The human stood like a wall. He swung the iron bar with precision when they tried to force their way in, knocking them back. Blood splattered, screams echoed, but he did not falter. Each strike was strong, each movement steady, as though he carried the strength of more than one man. The girl's heart raced. Fear consumed her, but so did awe. She had always thought of him as silent, calm, unshaken. Now she saw the storm beneath that silence. He fought not for glory, not for reward, but for her, for the worthless creature everyone wanted to throw away. After what felt like hours, the raiders retreated, their shouts fading into the night. The colony had survived, though scarred and broken. The neighbors, who had begged him to give her up, now avoided his eyes. None of them spoke. None dared to mock him. Inside, the girl sat by the fire again, her body trembling with exhaustion. The human cleaned the blood from his hands without a word, his face calm as always. She stared at him, her chest tight with emotions she could not name. Finally, in a voice soft as a whisper, she said, "I'm not worthless. Not if you say so." He looked at her then, his gaze steady, unflinching. For a moment, the firelight reflected in his eyes, and she thought she saw something gentler beneath the hardness. He did not speak, but he didn't need to. His silence was answer enough. That night, as she lay under the coat, her heart beat differently. It was not only fear or shame, it was something stronger. A warmth spread inside her, even though the world outside was still cruel. She understood now that he had given her more than food, more than shelter. He had given her a place, a reason to stand, even when everyone else wanted her gone. The colony still whispered, still doubted, still looked at her with narrowed eyes. But none of it mattered the way it had before, because when the world demanded her life as payment, he had stood in the doorway with iron in his hand and fire in his eyes, and he had said 2 words that changed everything. She stays. The seasons changed slowly, and with them the girl changed too. The weak, trembling creature from the cage was gone. She still wore the human's coat, though now it hung more loosely because her body had grown stronger, her cheeks fuller, her eyes brighter. She walked beside him through the colony streets, no longer hiding behind him, no longer keeping her head down. People stared, whispering, but it was different now. There was no laughter. Some were silent out of shame, others from confusion. They had mocked her once, called her worthless, but they had seen her stand beside the human when raiders came. They had seen her carry children out of the fire. They could no longer pretend she was nothing. Still, the memory of their cruelty remained in her chest like scars. Each time she walked past the market square, she remembered the cage, the mocking voices, the way the crowd had laughed at her price. The shame tried to creep back into her heart, but when she turned her head and saw the human walking calmly at her side, it faded. His steps were steady, his gaze fixed forward. He did not care for their whispers, and so she learned not to care either. One day, a group of traders stopped them. These were the same men who had once laughed the loudest when she was sold. They spoke carefully now, their voices less bold than before. "We were wrong about her," one admitted. "She has proven herself." Another added, Perhaps she has value after all. The girl's chest tightened, waiting to hear what the human would say. He looked at them, his face unreadable, his voice calm as ever. She always had value. You were too blind to see it. The traders fell silent, shame burning in their eyes. The girl's breath caught. Her heart swelled with something fierce, something that almost hurt. No one had ever defended her with such simple, cutting truth. She felt taller in that moment, even though she had not grown an inch. That evening, when they returned home, she sat by the fire, her hands resting in her lap. She wanted to speak, but did not know how. Finally, in a trembling voice, she said, "When you raised your hand that day, I thought it was a mistake. I thought you would change your mind, but you never did. Why?" The human looked at her quietly. The silence stretched, heavy, but not empty. At last he said, "Because I do not take back what I choose." His words struck deep. She remembered that moment in the market as clearly as if it had happened yesterday. The crowd's laughter, the traders' sneers, the iron bars of the cage. She remembered her heart sinking when no one raised a hand, the crushing weight of rejection. And then she remembered the human's arm rising, steady, refusing to fall. That moment had changed everything. It had pulled her from nothingness into life. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they were not only from pain. They were from gratitude, from something larger she could not name. She whispered, "I was no one, and you saw me. You gave me a chance." He did not reply, but he did not need to. His silence had always been enough. Days passed, and the girl grew braver. She began helping more in the house, in the fields, even with the tools she once dropped clumsily. She laughed sometimes, a soft, unfamiliar sound that startled even herself. When she made mistakes, she no longer whispered "useless" under her breath. She whispered instead, "I can try again." The words he had given her, the strength of his silence, had built something inside her that no cruelty could destroy. The colony changed too. Where once there had been only mockery, there was now respect. Children she had helped save ran to her with smiles, tugging at her hands. Adults nodded when she passed, some out of respect, some out of quiet guilt. And though whispers still lingered, they no longer broke her spirit. But she never forgot that it was not the colony that had given her worth. It was the human. His hand had risen when all others had stayed down. He had chosen her when no one else would, and he had never taken it back. One night, as the firelight flickered on the walls, she sat close to him, her voice soft. "Do you know what you did for me?" she asked. He looked at her, waiting. She took a deep breath. "You showed me that I was more than what they said. You showed me that I could be someone." His eyes softened, just for a moment, though his face stayed calm. He gave a small nod, and she felt her chest tighten with warmth. She realized then that his silence had always carried more than words. It had carried trust, strength, and a promise. The next morning, as the sun rose over the colony, she walked with her head high. She no longer hid in his shadow. She was not the broken girl from the cage anymore. She was the girl who had been seen, chosen, and defended. The girl who had saved children, who had stood in the fire, who had been told she was worth something. And every time she looked at the human, she remembered that moment in the market. His hand rising, the crowd's laughter, his refusal to lower it. To the world, it had been a strange choice, a foolish one. But to her, it had been everything. It had been life itself. His hand had never fallen, and because of that, she had risen.